welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for your interest in the 2023 James Irvine Foundation Leadership Awards. I'm Melissa Granville, partner at Capital Impacts, a Sacramento-based consulting firm that manages the Leadership Awards program with support from and funding from the James Irvine Foundation. We are excited to host this informational webinar today to help you submit a competitive nomination for the 2023 awards. Today, we will provide an overview of the Leadership Awards program, our team, and the selection criteria and process. We will also share some tips for nominating a leader. The last 20 to 30 minutes of today's webinar will be reserved for your questions. If you have any questions during our presentation, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A tool at the bottom of Zoom. And we will either address them in real time if we can, or at the end of the webinar during the last 20 to 30 minutes. With that, I will jump in and talk a little bit about the James Irvine Foundation. Next slide. So the James Irvine Foundation is a private, nonprofit grant-making institution dedicated to expanding opportunity for the people of California since its founding in 1937. In recent years, the foundation has narrowed the focus of its grant making. The foundation has structured its internal operations and directed its strategic grant making to achieve a singular goal, a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. With approximately $3.8 billion in assets, Irvine has made grants of $128.9 million in 2021 for the people of California. Next slide. The foundation established the James Irvine Foundation Leadership Awards in 2006, and each year the awards program recognized individuals and organizations that are confronting the state's critical challenges with innovative and effective solutions that improve people's lives and contribute to a better California. The foundation spotlights these exemplary leaders, helps share their approaches with policymakers and peers, and provides each of their organizations with a grant of $250,000 in additional resources. Leadership Awards program plays a critical role by lifting up critical work and innovative models of leaders, regardless of issue area, population served, sector, or region. The program helps the foundation learn about effective work taking place throughout California and provides a way to support the work of leaders and their organizations that they may not know about or fund through other programs. So since 2006, the founding of the program, Irvine has recognized over 100 diverse and innovative California leaders. With that, I would like to jump in by sharing more about the selection committee and the selection timeline. Next slide. So each year, an independent selection committee of California leaders identifies 4 to 6 recipients of the Leadership Awards. These leaders are distinguished for their extensive contributions to California communities and institutions. They work in diverse fields and reflect the ethnic and regional diversity of the state. So what is the process for selecting the award recipients? Next slide. Well, as you know, nominations are now open for the 2023 awards. And the process really starts with amazing folks like you who submit nominations that reflect the diversity of, reflect the ethnic and regional diversity of California. Next slide. After the deadline on April 29th, staff will review and advance the nominations that are most aligned with the awards criteria. In late July, the selection committee will select 10 to 12 finalists who are then notified. And then between August and October, staff and consultants and an expert in the field, in the finalists' field of work will meet with the finalists individually to better understand their work and its impact on California. In August, all nominators will be notified of the status of their nomination. The selection committee will meet again in late October to select the 4 to 6 award recipients. All finalists and recipients will be notified shortly after the decision. The 4 to 6 finalists will be announced in February 2023. Typically, the foundation spotlights these leaders and helps share their approaches with policymakers and peers through reception in Sacramento, meetings with policymakers, and other opportunities. Next slide, please. So who is eligible to be nominated for a leadership award? Nominated leaders must be residents of California. They can be an individual or a pair of leaders, and they can work in any sector or field. As I mentioned earlier, there's no preference among issue areas, sectors, or regions. Next slide. Okay, so what are the awards criteria? So the awards recognize notable leadership characterized by significance, innovation, effectiveness, timing, leadership capacity, and inclusiveness. We will dive into these a bit more later, and my colleague Catherine will dig into these in detail. Next slide. So these are the 2022 James Irvine Foundation Leadership Award recipients. They are advancing solutions on critical issues facing California: civic engagement, crime prevention, health and healthcare, support for foster youth, wildfire prevention, and workforce development. All of these leaders and their work tightly align with the awards criteria. A few of these leaders have even been nominated multiple times and have been finalists. And because of the maturity of their work and the current political and policy environment, the selection committee thought it was the right year for recognizing them for a leadership award. With that, I would like to pass the baton to my colleague, Catherine Hazelton, who will walk through some tips and nuances for submitting a nomination.
Thank you. It made me smile to see that picture of this year's award recipients because it's such a great group of leaders. And we're really excited to meet the next group that's coming toward us. Thanks to all of you. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Hazelton. I've been working with the Irvine Leadership Awards program since 2009, including as a nominations reviewer. As Melissa noted, staff take an initial pass at the nominations before we send to the selection committee the nominations that most closely align with the selection criteria. So today I'm going to share some tips from the perspective of a nomination reviewer, as well as some tips from the guidelines that the selection committee members use when they're reviewing nominations. So as we read each nomination, we assign scores based on how closely the nomination aligns with each of the selection criteria. This means that it's really important to use the prompts for each criterion and address each criterion, address the specific questions that we ask in those prompts as each section is scored. I'm going to start by talking about a few of the questions and criteria. We're not going to go in depth through all of the criteria right now, but happy to answer questions about any of the others that I don't get to. So the first thing that it's not actually a criterion, but you'll see when you start your nomination, the first section is the summary of the leader's work. Just want to give a couple tips there. That the summary section is where the nominators describe the work of the leader and the leader's organization. So is there a specific model or approach that the leader is advancing? If so, we would recommend developing that specific approach, or discussing that specific approach here in the summary section, and then again throughout the nomination. You'll note that several of the criteria inquire about an issue that the leader is addressing or their approach. And you may have gleaned that this award is just as much about the leader's work and the work of their organization as it is about the leader themselves. So while it is a leadership award, it's about both the leader and their work. It's important to remember when preparing the nomination. All right, let's talk a little bit about significance. So the significance section is where nominators describe the problem that the leader and their organization are working to solve and why that problem is critical in California. It's also helpful in this section to describe the population or the community that's affected by the problem. We recommend indicating the number of people who are affected now or projected to be affected in the future. Let's look at innovation. So we consider many different forms of innovation, including work that represents an entirely new approach or a creative leap from standard practices. We also look at work that might not be widely known or practiced in California. So this could include a traditional approach that's known in one community, but might not be widely known in other communities. Innovation could also mean the leader is applying a proven approach, but applying it in a new way or within a new context. So for example, an approach that was developed in Los Angeles and the leader has adapted it for use in rural communities in California. That could be the innovation. Or it could be an approach that came up through the public education system and is really based on education pedagogy, but the leader has adapted it and utilized it in a correction setting, and that's where the innovation lies. A question that we ask ourselves as reviewers is whether the leader's work might serve as an informative model for other communities. Could it influence how others approach a problem? In that case, we might have evidence of innovation. All right, let's talk about effectiveness. In the effectiveness section, we're looking for how the leader has achieved positive change or directly improved people's lives. Has the leader made substantial progress in addressing the problem? We recommend that you describe how effective the leader has been at addressing the problem that was stated in the summary or in the significance section, not just the nominee's overall effectiveness as a leader, but how well they've advanced their model or addressed a critical issue. And we've recently broadened how we define effectiveness, how we understand it as reviewers. So I'm going to share a little bit more detail about this section. The more competitive nominations will provide tangible, measurable evidence of effectiveness, such as data from evaluations or surveys or case studies or comparisons to similar groups. Evidence that the leader's work has inspired policy change or change in people's behavior can also be a compelling indicator of effectiveness. Some nominators also provide anecdotes about how the work directly impacts their community or people's lives. And others include examples that demonstrate the emotional impact of the leader's work. For example, a thought-provoking work of art that's been widely viewed or cited. All of these are considered evidence of effectiveness, and a combination of several of these factors can make an even stronger case for effectiveness. Changes within the organization, like the budget or staffing levels, tend to be less compelling as an argument for effectiveness, though they might be worth noting if they far exceed expectations or if they're connected perhaps to the leader's programmatic goals. So for example, if the leader's running a workforce development program and they've doubled their staff by hiring a significant number of their clients, that might be worth noting as evidence of effectiveness. All right, I'm going to talk a little, those are some of our key criteria, but I'm going to talk about another way that we review the nominations, other factors that we consider. So we do a holistic review process, and through that, we tend to ask ourselves 3 sets of questions. So I want to explore those with you. The first relates to diversity. Does this particular nominee diversify the nominations pool? And we consider a number of different factors as we think about diversity. The region in which the leader works, the leader's ethnic background, other personal demographic factors, any life experiences that the leader might bring to their work, especially if those life experiences inform how they conduct their work. The issue on which the leader works, and also their sector, public, private, nonprofit. In addition to diversity, we look at the opportunity that the leader might have to leverage a leadership award. So how would receiving a leadership award create new opportunities for this leader to expand their work and inform policy? Is the timing right? Is it likely to be relevant and prioritized by policymakers and peers over the next few years? Is the work ready to be replicated? And is the leader ready to take it to the next level? Would the recognition from or resources from this award make a difference in the leader's journey? Or is the leader's organization so large and the leader perhaps already so well known that the award frankly wouldn't make much of a difference? Another component to our holistic review could be described as uniqueness. Is there an interesting story to tell? Do policymakers and peers in the leader's field already know this story? Do they already know the leader and their approach? Or would there be something new for them to learn by recognizing this leader? Has the awards program recently recognized someone doing very similar work? So I'm going to give an example of this one. In this year's cohort, we recognized a leadership team that is creating jobs in fire prevention for people who were formerly incarcerated. It would probably be a few years before we would recognize another leader doing work that's very similar to that. That work is quite specific, but we would consider in the next year, for example, organizations that are doing work that is more broadly related. So we'd be open to other nominations that are addressing workforce issues or addressing people who've been formerly incarcerated, just not the specific type of work that a very recent award recipient was conducting. All right, I want to talk a little bit about nominators. So we frequently get this question, who should nominate a leader? And really the answer is anyone can be a nominator. And we've had a really diverse and wide range of successful nominators. Some think it's really important to have a very prominent person submit the nomination. And while that's interesting and it might be considered, there are lots of types of nominators who can describe and validate a nominee's work and provide context for why it's important. The most important factor is that the nominator is well acquainted with the nominee and can describe their alignment with the award criteria. Some nominators know the nominee's policy field really well, and they can describe how the approach is different from their peers. Or they might be able to identify where there's opportunity for expansion and replication. So this might be a policymaker or a funder or a researcher, or maybe even a board member. Others can describe how they personally or other community members have been affected by the nominee's work. So this might be a client or another community leader who has observed the leader in action. It's required that the nominator be someone other than the nominee. So you can't nominate yourself. The nominee also, or nominator also cannot be a family member of the nominee and preferably not employed by the nominee. Now, I'll share some information that we learned when we surveyed nominators after last year's nomination cycle. First, on average, nominators reported that, and let's advance the slide, nominators reported that they spent 3 to 8 hours preparing their nomination. Second, about 60% of nominators engaged their nominee as they prepared their nomination. So you're certainly not required to work with the nominee, but it's an acceptable practice and apparently a fairly common practice. We also got some formatting tips from nominators. They recommend drafting your nomination in a Word document outside of our nomination portal. So first drafting it externally and then copying and pasting the content into our nominations portal. They also recommend not using the bullet function in Word because apparently the formatting gets lost when it's moved over into our nominations portal. So if you want to use bullets, that's fine. We just suggest manually inserting dashes and not using Word's bulleting function. And if the formatting does end up looking a little wonky, we really don't want you to worry about it. We do not pay any attention to the formatting of the nominations. It's really based just on the content. All right, I'm going to stop there for now and turn the conversation back over to Melissa so she can invite questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Great. So we would love to open it up for any questions that folks have, and also want to thank you for helping us identify amazing leaders across the state that we can help support and elevate in 2023. So I do have a couple of questions queued up here. So if a pair of leaders is nominated, is it best to explain their accomplishments separately or focus on projects they are doing together to advance the model? So the short answer is, we would want to uplift the work that they are doing together. However, there are, part of the leadership capacity section, there are opportunities to talk about some of the work that they're doing independently. But ultimately, we would want to elevate a model that they are working on together. Catherine, anything else to add on that one? Okay, great. So could the nominator employee employ the nominee? Could the nominator be part of the nominee's organization's leadership team? I think Catherine addressed this question, but yeah, I think we can. Do you want to add anything, Catherine?
Well, there's just a nuance here that we do recommend that the nominator not be an employee of the nominee, but sometimes other members of the leadership team will nominate. Sometimes the nominee's boss will nominate, and that's fine. It can be preferable to have an external nominator who can further validate the work, but it's fine for someone in the nominee's leadership team.
So I'll address Bernie's question. Is there a synopsis of what programs were awarded to see if my nominee would not be considered? You can look on the irvineawards.org website, and we have all of the award recipients listed, and all of their models and kind of impact listed, especially the most recent year. Okay, great. Can a leader of a group that is fiscally sponsored project receive a leadership award through that fiscal sponsor? I think, yes. Catherine, do you want to field this question?
I think we've had folks who've been in that situation before. I don't see why not.
Okay. I think I answered that. I'm an unpaid staff person, and so how does this fit into being a nominee? Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, I think what's really, it doesn't matter to us if you're paid or unpaid, but what is important is whether the nominee would be in a position to leverage the award. So would they be, fully engaged in advancing the model, working with policymakers, working with the field? Typically, this would be someone in a full-time work arrangement, whether that's paid or unpaid, but someone who is committed to leveraging the award over the next year or two. So I'm thinking about one team that we had in the past where it was the executive director of an organization and the board chair. The board chair was unpaid for their work. They were recognized together as a team though. The board chair, who I believe was retired from paid work, but really involved in the organization, was committed as part of this leadership team to advancing the work that they did together.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we got a question from Kat. Can you speak more about the distinction of government funding that impacts the eligibility of the nominee? For example, the nominee's organization receives payments from clients that receive government funds. Does that impact eligibility? It does not impact eligibility. It just impacts how we make a grant to the organization in which the leader works. So when the James Irvine Foundation established the foundation in 1937, he stipulated that its funds shall be used for such charities that do not enjoy substantial support through taxation. So as a result, we may only make a grant to a publicly funded organization if the grant supports a specific project that does not receive most of its funding from public dollars. So it just changes the type of grant that we might make to the organization. Instead of general operating support, it might be very specific project support.
And when we have recognized public sector leaders in the past, they've directed the funding to a nonprofit arm of their organization that they work with. So that's another option.
Okay, thank you. Does the foundation's newly narrowed focus on a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically mean that nominees should be working on worker employment, economic justice related issues? No. So this is one area where, or one grant program that the foundation has where all issue areas, sectors, fields are encouraged to be nominated. And it is a, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the foundation loves this program for that exact reason. It is a way for them to learn about work and leaders across the state that they may not fund through other, or work with or fund through other programs. Okay, Roxanne asked, does the nominated person need to be C-level? So typically the leaders that have been recognized in the past have been executive directors, folks that are leading, have decision-making capacity for the model or project or organization. They don't always have to be an executive director or what have you. As Catherine mentioned earlier, if it's a larger organization, we have recognized leaders that maybe run a particular program. So a couple of examples of this is Yemi Rodriguez, who works for an organization that is statewide, and there are multiple offices, and Yemi runs the Central Valley or Fresno office of that entire organization. Another example would be like a university, for example, where maybe there are different departments, right? So maybe someone leading that department could be nominated. Those are a few examples. One question is, could you share a little bit more? About what you take into consideration about where the leader is advancing the model? Catherine, do you want to field this on timing?
Sure. So it's important that the leader has demonstrated that the model works. So there is evidence of effectiveness of the model, and that it's at a stage of stability that it can either be continued on in the future, it could be expanded, it could be replicated and scaled up. So there's existing effectiveness and stability. And moving forward, the leader is either planning to continue elevating their model or helping others replicate and scale it up.
Thank you. Okay, Sylvia's asking, can we provide letters of recommendation about nominees to add value to the nomination? No, we do not accept letters of recommendation at this time. Okay. In this era of remote work, if someone is working at a California organization but is currently living in another state, is there any flexibility? Yes, as long as their work is, well, Catherine, do you want to field this actually? It's a good question.
I actually don't think so. I'd love to see if Cindy from the Irvine Foundation wants to add anything from Irvine's perspective. But I don't think that we've ever elevated a leader who is not based in California. I don't think we'd be likely to do that. I'm not sure there's exactly a prohibition. I just think it doesn't align really closely with the criteria. Yeah, and Cindy's asking whether they'd be permanently outside of California. Right, like if they're planning to come back, they've been in California, the organization's operating in California, the model's in California, and the leader's coming back in a couple months, sure, fine. But probably not permanently based outside of California.
Okay. good question. We're all learning and evolving as the world changes, so I appreciate the new questions. So Donnie's asking, if the organization and its leader receives a significant amount of grant funding from government entities, that would be a potential non-starter, or only if it is a for-profit or fee-for-service situation. No, we would work with the organization after they have been selected to identify how we could manage the grant making. We do make grants to nonprofits and the organization itself, so that would be a requirement, but it isn't a non-starter if the organization receives major funding from government sources. We've definitely had that in the past. Great, and then I did see a message about the selection committee in the chat. So good, astute observation, Jeff. We had 6 selection committee members on the slide and 5 on our website. And that is because we have just added a chair to the selection committee and are adding a few more selection committee members here shortly. It is a 9-member selection committee that ultimately picks the award recipients, and the website will be updated as we get those folks onboarded. So we're excited to add some new individuals to our team. Okay, so Kat's asking, can you speak to how joint nominations are typically submitted? 2 people nominating the same person? Yes, so typically those folks work together, and on the nomination, you can fill in the information about each of the nominees. You know, we've included them in site visits before, where they can tell us a little bit more about their work as well, if they're a finalist. Anything else to add there, Catherine?
I think I just want to kind of address both sides of this. That if there are 2 nominators for 1 nominee, 1 leader, we do recommend a joint nomination of them together. When there are multiple nominations submitted, it can actually create some challenges because we may only be able to advance 1 nomination to the selection committee, and then we have to choose which one, and we don't want to just like detract or take anything away from what either of the nominators had to say. So we do recommend that if there are 2 different nominators nominating the same person, that they work together if possible. Sometimes they don't know that they're each submitting a nomination and we figure it out, but we do recommend doing it together. And then I just in case this is interpreted a different way, I want to also note, if you're nominating a leadership pair, 2 different leaders, they would be nominated within the same nomination. They would be nominated together in 1 document.
Thank you. Okay, if a leader has been nominated before, they can be nominated again, correct? Yes. In fact, we've had award recipients that have been nominated a number of times, and due to the world changing and their work evolving, it was the right time for them to be recognized. So yes, we encourage folks to keep on nominating leaders. Great. Can you please give an example of a creative model as it refers to a meeting the need? Do you want to address this, Catherine? Not quite sure I understand.
I'm not sure I understand the question either.
Bernie, would you mind maybe rephrasing in the chat or in Q&A? In the meantime, how many folks typically apply and how many are typically chosen? So each year we receive somewhere between 400 and 500 nominations, and 4 to 6 award recipients are chosen each year, and they can be pairs. So for example, 2022, we picked 6 organizations, or the selection committee picked 6 organizations and 7 leaders. So one organization had a pair of leaders that were nominated. Okay, So I'm seeing a few questions in the chat. Can two people be jointly nominated from different organizations if they're leading the same innovative model? Yes. We've definitely seen this before where, for example, there was an elected leader that was nominated with a nonprofit leader, and they were working together with government and the nonprofit to tackle an issue. And the funding went to the nonprofit organization, but those two leaders were uplifted.
We had another one where there were two nonprofit leaders, two different nonprofits, but working together on the same issue. And we made the grant to one organization and they re-granted part of it to the other organization. So, so it's not, it can also be that both organizations get funding. But yes, it can be two leaders from two different organizations.
Okay. All right. So if you were doing work that meets a need, what is an example of doing this work? An example is food security.
So I think you would outline what the problem is, you know, who's being affected, how extensive is the problem. And then I think you would just show that the leader is addressing a significant portion of the population, or is perhaps addressing a smaller portion of the population, but deeply meeting their needs. So moving them to a place where food insecurity is absent from their lives, where they are on a food secure path for, you know, for the conceivable future. So either making very significant, meaningful progress with a portion of the population, or more broadly, making some progress with a large portion of the population. Melissa, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was good explanation. Okay, can a leader be nominated by a foundation that has awarded the leader's organization in the past? Yes. So we have had many successful nominations that have been created by another partner in philanthropy or leader in philanthropy that works with the nominee. Anything to add, Catherine? Okay, great. Okay, our award recipients, typically running nonprofits, have for-profit recipients been honored in the past years. Typically, I would say 99% are nonprofit leaders. Catherine, do you have any examples of for-profit recipients that have been honored in the past?
Trying to think of one. I don't think so. There might be some organizations that have a nonprofit and a for-profit arm, and their nonprofit arm is being recognized. But I might say it's 90% nonprofit leaders, but with the others, primarily in the government public sector, we have not recognized someone that's explicitly for-profit that I can think of. However, there's an interest in doing so. There have been in recent years a number of for-profit organizations that have come to the higher levels of the nominations process, and it's certainly something that we're open to. I think what's important here, I'll just give a little like behind the scenes, is motivation. So when there's a question about whether the work is motivated by monetary profit, as opposed to like, and would the award just be used to, to bring a lot more revenue into an organization? That feels like it's a bit less aligned than more of a social sector motivation. Now, that doesn't mean that a for-profit institution can't have a social sector a set of goals, and that's something we are very, very open to recognizing.
Thank you. Okay, does government funding impact eligibility? No. So we would work, it would impact how we would fund the organization, but not eligibility. So. Okay. I think we've answered all the questions. Going once, going twice. And we will, okay. Are Irvine leaders organizations often chosen for continued funding? So I'll answer the question from the leadership board's perspective. This is a one-time grant that we provide to the award recipients. So from the leadership board's program, we don't provide year-over-year funding. However, Irvine has funded organizations that have been recognized by the leadership awards program. Do you want to add anything, Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want anyone to think that nominating for this award is just a way to get on Irvine's funding radar. It doesn't typically work that way. And there may be some rare instances in which that has occurred, but there's probably better ways to spend your development time. I think, however, a lot of folks who do ultimately receive an award do have reported back to Irvine that it has given a boost to their development efforts more broadly. So it's opened doors with other funders. It's also validated their work for other funders, and so it's made it easier for them to, on the development side, to raise money.
Thank you. Good point. Okay, Jeff's asking, is it helpful for the nominators who have past recipients of the Irvine Leadership Award? Obviously, we would love to see that, but we don't rate the nominators. We'd love to see that, but anybody can nominate. So we hope that we see a diversity of nominators. It could be a client, it could be an award recipient, it could be a board member, it could be a leader in philanthropy. We'd love to see it all. Thank you. Okay, Nicole's asking, how often are award recipients recognized after their first nomination? That's a good question. I actually don't have data on that. I will say that a lot of organizations that have been recognized or leaders that have been recognized have been nominated multiple times. I don't have the data on whether they've been the first nomination and to recognition ratio. Do you know, Catherine, generally?
I mean, we don't have data on that, but I would say at least a third and probably more. It's not like we're not going to consider someone just because they haven't been in the running year after year. It's really how well their work lines up in the context of the current year.
Okay, how might a nomination demonstrate how the leader org is well positioned to inform policy? Do you want to field this, Catherine, since you led that section?
Yeah, so it's helpful when there's evidence that the leader's been engaged in policy-related conversations, either at the local or state level. And that could be because of positions that they hold. It could be because there's direct evidence that they have engaged in policy in some way or another in the past. It could be because they are either like some sort of appointment that they hold, or maybe they hold a position in the field, like the leader of a state association, that demonstrates that they're used to speaking publicly on behalf of the issue. Also, just that evidence of speaking publicly on behalf of an issue is helpful. And then, so that's some of the leader's capacity and ability to move in a policy-oriented space. But then we also think about the political context and whether this is an issue that might feasibly have traction in California policymaking, either at the state or local level in the next couple of years. And that's just based on, an assessment, our understanding of the policy and political context. Let me add, actually, sometimes a nomination will talk about specific opportunities. So like the governor is interested in this issue, or, the legislature took up this issue in the past and, suggesting that they may take this up again in the near future, there's a ballot initiative on this being planned for 2 years from now, or, you know, something that like that can actually be inserted, that here is the policy opportunity.
Okay. Question, do you have suggestions for how organizations productively catch the attention of the Irvine Foundation? I think this kind of goes back to Catherine's point a little bit earlier. You know, there is no guarantee that that Irvine will fund any of the award recipients beyond the receiving the leadership award. So I can't really speak to catching the eye of Irvine, but I will say that, you know, for the leadership awards program, certainly aligning with the awards criteria and keeping an eye on timing and innovation and articulating a competitive nomination. Okay.
I wanted to add a nuance, just going back to the last question about policy, that that policy engagement is not required. There are plenty of leaders who haven't been involved in policy at all. And one of the benefits that they get from the award is some coaching and opportunity scouting of where they could be engaged in policy in the future. But it's definitely not a requirement. And there have been plenty of leadership award recipients whose work has really been in their field and not on the policy level to date.
Thank you. Great point. Okay. Any additional questions before we wrap up? Okay. Our nominee and organization is involved in several policy-focused innovations. Would it be better to focus on one or the overall impact of all of them? It kind of depends. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your nomination. I think we've seen successful nominations do both of those things. So it depends on the type of organization too. If it's an advocacy organization that has a lot of policy wins, listing that or talking about really monumental ones can be really beneficial. But it kind of depends on the type of organization and nominee and the type of work that they're doing. But I think, you know, it doesn't hurt to list some policy wins and outcomes. Yeah, anything else to add, Catherine?
I guess I would just encourage the nominator to think about what's the story that we would ultimately tell at the end of the day if this leader were to receive an award. Would we be positioning them because of a particular innovation? And that's really the interesting thing that we think people want to learn about, replicate, and that would inform policy. And that can be fine. It can be just a slice of their work if that seems like the really innovative piece and that there is enough to prove the effectiveness of that piece. But it could be that the leader should be positioned because they are the recognized leader in their field on, that they have advanced a whole body of work related to immigration, let's say, and that's, evidenced by, several different policy wins or several different programs. And so it's more broad. And I would just think about what is the story that you would imagine us telling at the end of the day and draft the nomination that way.
Thank you. So what is the interaction typically like between nominator and nominee or their organization? That is, does the nominee's org often ghostwrite the nomination, coordinate with the nominator, or do you think the nominators write on their own? I based on surveys of the nominators last year, we found that about 60% of nominators worked with the nominee or interacted with them in some way. So whether that information was written by the nominee or the nominator, we don't know, but we do know that they often are working with the nominee to gather information and populate some of the responses to significance or innovation, et cetera. Anything else to add, Catherine?
Sometimes we receive nominations that read like a grant proposal with like boilerplate information that has probably been used in lots of grant proposals. And those tend to be less compelling. You know, we look for nominations that really do address the selection criteria. So I mentioned that because I think sometimes if someone is nominating themselves, it kind of can come across as that like boilerplate, like here's how we always talk about the organization. You know, so I would say, regardless of whether it's ghostwritten or not, be sure you're addressing the criteria. And the other thing is that it's helpful when a nominator can add their own validation. You know, I understand this nominee's work because of my role as X, Y, and Z. You know, here's how that perspective indicates to me that this person is, you know, it is the right, you know, the right person to advance it. So that often comes across with like policymakers when they're saying like, you know, look, this organization is, you know, is very effective in, you know, in the Capitol, or this organization has an opportunity because the legislature plans to invest in, you know, in this field over the coming years. Or it could be someone like a client is talking about how this leader has made a difference in their lives personally. And so they're still hitting all the criteria, but if they can insert a little bit about from their own perspective that validates the leader's work, that can be really useful.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions? We will be sharing this recording. It will be posted in a blog post on the website as well as emailed out to everyone here and not here. So we'll share this out and on social media as well. So these slides and the recording will be available to you. We also send the questions and point you to the FAQ page on our website, which has a lot of the answers that we've talked through today as well. So if you missed something or if your colleagues weren't able to attend today, we will provide this information to everyone. Okay, well, with that, I'll go ahead and just thank everyone again for being here and spending an hour with us today to learn more about the 2023 James Irvine Foundation Leadership Awards. We couldn't do this without you. So thank you so much for identifying those great leaders that we can help uplift and support next year. So thanks so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care.